Next up, time for new faces. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I think we can skip through that one. On to outstanding RFCs. Let me share my screen here, 1 second.
Huh, I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, starting from the bottom here, RFC for bill of materials work.
No update here. Same as last week. We're just continuing to do some investigation. So we can answer the last few open questions here.
And just to double check, I forget from last week, is this ready for a review? Would you like us to read through it again, or are we waiting on?
I think you can hold off on that for now.
Great. Up next, proposal to add libz to the tiny runtime image. It looks like this week this does have the required set of approvals. Is this something that we are ready to merge? Or is there anything outstanding here that we should discuss?
I'm ready for it to be merged.
Cool. I think we probably need someone from the stack, one of the stacks maintainers to merge this. Okay. So that one is ready. We have a new one today, RFC to promote the Python build pack from community.
Yeah, so we have a few Python build packs in the community, and this one's just proposing to like promote them to the main org. Yeah.
Looks like Ryan has a comment here about some changes he would like to see before it gets promoted. Is that something we want to talk about today?
I mean, I can just enumerate what those things are. I think like just that I think that 90% of that build pack is good and ready to go. I think there's just like a handful of things that we kind of now expect of like all of the language family build packs that are in the top level org. And I've enumerated the ones I could think of, which is like the inclusion of these utility build packs that all the other top level build packs have. Python still doesn't have those. There were a couple kind of like performance related things on pip install and pip env install that I'd like to see. Maybe if we don't implement them, at least a resolution to the open issues that are written there, like why we wouldn't implement them at this point. And the last two things are like, it seems reasonable that we could implement documentation of the build pack itself and sample apps by just putting those things into the build pack repository. So you could follow the kind of example that the .NET Core build pack has with a docs directory that could be ready to be pulled into the top level website as a Hugo module when that kind of maybe happens in the future, but at least the docs are there already written. And the same thing for samples. It's like already implemented. It's something we could then just copy and paste over into the samples repo when that's done. I think if we had all four of those things, I would happily approve this and we could start working on it whenever.
Yeah, happy to keep this RFC open for more comments. And like once we have collected all the prerequisites that the community thinks that it can be promoted, then I think I'm ready to like put this into draft and get all that things ready and then come back to it.
I agree strongly that we should do all those things. I don't feel as strongly that we need to gate promotion on it because it'd be nice to make the Python build pack available to end users. And as long as we did these things sort of in a quick time frame, I would feel okay about that, but I'm also
I just don't think it's like,
well.
Like to me, the promotion to the top level is about like indicating its like level of maturity. And like, if we don't have these things, then like, it doesn't seem like it is mature to me. And folks would then have like, immediately you would see issues of like, well, the Python builder is in the full, or the Python build pack is in the full builder, but there are no docs for it. So like, how do I even start to use this thing if that's the expectation? So like, I think that to me today, like people who do want to use the Python build pack can, it is referenceable by just like referencing its location on the community side. So it's not like we're preventing end users from getting this thing. We just haven't put it in front of everyone by default. And to me, it just feels like that bar of like the expectations for that build pack that would be available by default is just a little bit higher than where we're at.
I think I agree with the idea around documentation and whatnot. Are any of these particular points negotiable? I think that the big eye raiser for me is the improved performance through layer caching is the only thing where I'm a little hesitant. I mean, I don't really have any say in it, but like that would make me hesitant in terms of, I think that would really delay how long it would take to get in. I think the other things seem pretty reasonable.
I think that's the one that's the most negotiable. I think like at the end of the day, there's 2 open issues that are linked there. What I would just like to see is like an explanation as to like why we would defer it. Right now, they just seem to be like kind of open questions where it's like, well, I think this resolves the issue, but then anecdotally, it doesn't seem to. And so like, I'd just like someone to spend a little bit of time to look at why we would defer this or why we should implement it. Just so that those things are more clear, and at least the implementation of those things is much more actionable at that point.
That all seems reasonable to me. Is there any more discussion folks want to have on this before we move on?
I don't know that there's any more discussion out of this. I would like to maybe, as some of this, see a list of some requirements so that every time a new build pack or build pack family is suggested, we have a list of loose requirements in terms of things that we feel that need to be present, like documentation, sample applications, any other integration, that sort of thing. That might be something cool to put on like in our community repo or something like that, if someone would be willing to write up that kind of set of standards, or I guess open up an RFC to establish the kind of standards, or something. It kind of just sounds like I signed myself up for work.
Style guide.
Yeah. I mean, mostly what I did was just look at the existing build packs and say, like, what are the features that these existing build packs that we've already said meet the bar of what we expect top level org? What do they implement? And what does that mean for the diff between that and what Python currently implements? Like, these were the things that stood out to me as like non-trivial differences between those 2 sets of types of build packs. Yeah.
I definitely think I agree, but I think the difference between looking like you're enforcing a standard and being capricious is having it written down somewhere. So
no, I agree with that. I think
cool.
I'm just giving you a roadmap for what you should do.
Oh, perfect.
Which
Thank
is
you
to
so
look
much.
at the existing set of build packs and see what the difference is.
I'll write that down in my handy notebook then.
The only thing I want to say is, like, I think other build packs, when we are promoted, like things like documentation, sample apps, we've done this like after we promoted, because in the community, we don't really have a standard place to put the documentation or sample apps. So are you suggesting we make something in the community, do that first and demonstrate that we have documentation and such, and then promote it?
Well, no, I think both of those, I don't think you need to make space, right? I think it'd be perfectly reasonable for you to put a samples directory in the top level Python build pack repo and put all your samples in there. And I think it would also make sense for you to put a docs directory, very similarly to how .NET Core does, and put your docs in there. And that can all live while it lives in the Paketo community. Basically, like, what I'd like to see is that when it comes time to promote this to the top level, it is really a matter of fact of like just moving the repos, renaming some stuff, and maybe copying and pasting some things into the right locations. That it doesn't create a situation where it's like, now that this is promoted, it's urgent that we do a bunch of work, like write up documentation, create sample apps, fill out the remainder of features that maybe users are expecting, right? Like right now, there isn't urgency around the fact that we have those things because it isn't a top level build pack. But as soon as we promote it, then there is necessarily an urgency. And like what I'd like to avoid is derailing anyone else's plans for what they should be working on because we like artificially create this urgency.
I agree with all of the things we should do. One of the things I've been wondering, and I think it's probably out of scope for this particular question, is sort of like a discussion around how we use community versus Paketo. I've been wondering if we could use things like, have Buildpacks in the Paketo namespace, but are not 1.0 or maybe not included in a builder as sort of like different gating mechanisms for different levels of readiness instead of the like move between orgs as being the thing. But I think your interpretation of this probably does fit with the community RFC. So I don't think we need to have that discussion around this particular build pack. But I do wonder if it can make things more discoverable if they were in the Paketo org, but we could still find some other way to indicate sort of the level of maturity.
On a sort of unrelated note, but very top of mind for me, whoever is going to be like implementing the docs writing, I would love to have a conversation with them because the way the Paketo docs are laid out is going to change a lot very soon. And it would be easier for everyone involved if the Python docs are written in like the new way. So I don't really know who's going to like make an issue to write docs or if it already exists, but I would like to weigh in on that when the time comes.
Is there anywhere public where you're documenting the documentation process / style changes?
We're like rewriting stuff right now. That's like the next thing to do. So the docs just will be different soon.
Oh,
If
okay.
that answers your question.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, well, like really basically like the Python docs, we want them to look like the rest of our documentation. And in order to do that, they'll need to look a little bit different than the way that most of our docs currently look. So instead of like writing and then rewriting, just easier to do it the new way first.
Will you be like getting approval from maintainers when rewriting specific build pack docs, or does anyone else care? I don't know that I really care, but
it's a good question. Maybe we should like actually have that as its own discussion. I can like push that onto the agenda.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right, I think we're done on this one then. Okay. That was it for our RFCs. So going back to the agenda, I think that brings us to the thing that Frankie was about to add about documentation.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess really quick, I had another future topic that's very small, but I just wanted to get it knocked out of the way. We have this Paketo Buildpacks builder repo that currently serves almost no purpose because the RFCs are checked in somewhere else and there's not really any, and there's like some deprecated junk in there. And so I wanted to understand, first of all, what the sort of org process is for retiring that repo. And then secondly, what that actually means, like archive it, delete it, neither. I don't really know what the process is for such a thing.
I don't think we have a defined process for repository retirement. What I have seen for some of the repos that don't appear to be used anymore is that they are archived and therefore like still referenceable for links or anyone that happens to be using those things, but are left in like a read-only state.
Okay. I'm happy to do that if it's within the rules. I do have the permissions to do it logistically.
I think it's reasonable for the maintainers to make that decision on their own and say, this is not something we're choosing to continue to maintain. And yeah, I think it makes sense that the preference is to have it just be read only rather than like removing the repo entirely.
Cool. And I do not seemingly need to write an RFC just to do this. Great. Okay. Amazing.
Just do it.
I will just do it then. Fantastic. That's what I like to hear. Okay, yeah. So that's all that. And then maybe the more interesting topic is, yeah, like the Paketo docs rewrite. So I guess the long and short of it is that with our website redesign also comes a sort of information architecture redesign of the docs, which is something that you can look at on the Figma, which I can link in the agenda, I guess. The general idea here is that instead of the current organization of our docs, we're hoping to have the docs organized into high level, getting started, how to, reference, and concepts sections, which is not the file tree structure that we currently have in the Paketo docs, and is also not the sort of conceptual organization structure that we have right now in the Paketo docs. So in order to truly make the Paketo site have how-to docs and reference docs, it will probably involve taking the existing prose that is the docs for each language family and splitting them out into 2 separate documents for each. And I guess Forrest's question from earlier is, are we going to seek maintainer approval for these rewrites? We being me and Andy, who are working on the website redesign. So I guess I put that question to the group. I don't think we had really planned on going through much of like a approval process because most of the files that we'd be editing sit in the website repo. So like tactically, we have the permissions to just change them. But if people have different thoughts about that, I'd love to hear about it.
My hot take is that it would be nice as these PRs go up to at least ping the different language family maintainers so folks have a chance to review and give feedback if they would like to, but it doesn't need to be like a hard gating approval.
I'm good with that too. I feel like it's mostly going to end up being a like restructuring and reshuffling of the information that's already there. So I'm fine with that. Just giving people the option, but I don't know if you want to like time box it, and if you don't get any feedback after like a day or two, just go for it. I'd be fine with that. Although I do have a question, and maybe I just missed this along some timeline. Is there a plan to ever move the rest of our docs over to Hugo modules like we have for .NET Core? Because then they end up going through the review from the maintainers, right?
Yeah, so currently we decided like in the website initiative, like order of priorities, not to immediately push all the docs out into Hugo modules because we were about to do a reorganization, and that's significantly harder to do when you have files sort of far and wide. Yes, the plan is to use Hugo modules to push some content related to language families into their respective repos, but it's not necessarily super clear right now which content will be the right stuff, because like future goals are automatically generating reference documentation, which may mean that it's not actually checked in anywhere, or maybe we want it to be checked in, right? So there's sort of questions about, well, what words would we actually want to live in the language family repo? So rather than move things first and then decide that second, we figured we would change up the content and then think about who should own what like markdown files. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
I guess another way to solve this problem that would be heavier weight is to push all of the markdown into the language families now, and then, you know, politely pull request in our changes everywhere around, which like we could do, but I think would be slower and heavier.
Sounds good to me. I really just wanted to bring it up because I know the structure of a lot of the Java docs differ from the structure of some of the other documentation that we have. And I wanted to at least ask Emily and Dan if they had any reservations, I guess. But if Emily is cool with just getting a ping and checking it off, then I don't know that I really have any qualms.
Yeah, I don't need to make myself like a gating approval. I'd be curious to see the new structure, but I'm generally very on board with the restructuring. I like the idea of breaking things down into these concepts. I think it'd be great to get people maintaining different languages to read over things for accuracy. But if we make it a gating approval, I think there'll be a week of running around chasing votes that maybe isn't what's important about that process.
Fair. In which case, maintainers keep an eye out for a GitHub notification on a PR to the Paketo website.
Might even be something that would be worth, like, I don't know, taking folks through in a session in the working group. Like,
Yeah.
this seems like a big change that affects everyone. Like maybe it's something that like a little, depending on when you're finishing it up. Like if you're finishing up before next week anyways, maybe it's not necessary, but otherwise maybe it's be a fun thing to share with this group in a future working group.
Yeah, we certainly could. I'll talk to Andy about this, and I'll throw something on future topics if that makes sense.
Last thing on the agenda, I wanted to plug some work Dan did creating a UPX build pack. Since we approved that RFC, it's been implemented and shipped. I think we're going to include it in the Java native image. That I don't know if that's done or not. Dan can speak to that one, but for other language family maintainers, like if you have a build pack that compiles down to a binary like Go, feel free to pull this in.
We don't have that in native image quite yet. Probably the next week or two, we'll get that in.
But the component is ready for folks to play with. That's it for our agenda today. Anyone have anything else they want to talk about?
Might be worth mentioning, we have a implementation for the watch exec runtime reload PR as well, or RFC as well. Hopefully things go well. We'll check that in tomorrow.
Very cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. A lovely Tuesday.